flawless victory.
Hey, I'm back with another cool build for Ghost of Tsushima Legends. This time, it's time to turn the Hunter into a headshot machine that will annihilate entire waves in a single shot. This build revolves around using the Skipping Stone, which is a legendary bow, to get as many headshots as possible, dealing an insane amount of damage with each arrow. Just in case you don't know what the Skipping Stone does, this bow makes it so arrows bounce to other targets when you get a headshot, and the best part is that this also applies to your ultimate, fire arrows, and your special ability, which is crazy. You don't get additional explosions when that arrow bounces, but it does do damage and light people on fire, which is awesome anyway. Before I get started, if you haven't seen my Samurai and Assassin guide, I recommend you give those a look, and if you like them, hey, maybe think about subscribing to the channel for more. Alright, as usual, I will go over techniques and gear in detail, and then I will talk about general playstyle for this build. This is not as involved as the Assassin build, where you're managing several cooldowns at once, so it will be way more straightforward. Alright, let's take a look. First of all, we'll be taking Explosive Arrow, not Staggering Arrow, because of course we are. I don't think I need to explain why Explosive is better. Next up, we have Executioner, which will increase headshot damage by a whopping 50% for targets under 12 meters. This is extremely powerful when you're fighting over a circle, and yes, while you still want to keep your distance with the Hunter, you will have to fight real close sometimes, and as you'll see later, this will work extremely well with the rest of the build, which is why I'm not taking the 15% cooldown reduction. It also means all your bouncing arrows are also dealing plus 50% damage, since all of those are headshots, which is obviously incredibly effective. Moving on, we have Status Damage, which I think is the only actually valuable choice here. This will increase damage from fire arrows by 25%, helping you melt down targets even faster. But what about Nightmare, you might ask? Well, I will post a variation of this build for Nightmare later, because obviously fire damage won't be very useful given the enemy's immunity for it. But that will depend on what the weekly modifiers are. The gist of the Nightmare build would be maximizing resolve gain and spamming the ult as much as possible instead of dealing more fire damage. And lastly, we have Pinpoint, which gives you a 50% chance of body shots counting as headshots. Note that this isn't just dealing headshot damage, but rather treating the hit as a headshot, which means Skipping Stone will get triggered and bounce those arrows as well. This will prove extremely useful when you're fighting for a point and you don't have time to draw your bow all the way or line up good headshots. It will also help you get headshots on moving targets, which is also quite nice. Even though I'm landing headshots maybe 80 or 90% of the time, I still find this to be more useful than getting All-Seeing Eye, which adds 2 more targets for the ult. Skipping Stone will still get triggered with the ult, so you will get more shots with it anyway, and yes, getting 2 additional targets will trigger even more Skipping Stones, but it only really works when you're shooting an ult into a circle that has a huge amount of enemies or a wave that's just spawning in. Once enemies are more spread out, the bounces will get blocked off by obstacles and level geometry, so yeah. Pairing All-Seeing Eye with the Skipping Stone is really good for the meme value of taking down like 10 enemies at the same time, but it's not as helpful in those life or death situations where you're trying to stay in the circle while fighting 6 or 7 Onis at the same time. In those cases, being able to shoot anywhere you can and sometimes getting several hits at once is just better and more reliable. Now let's take a look at the gear. First up, we have the Moon Katana with water stance. These 2 stances are my personal favorites, but you can use whatever you want here. What we do want, however, is the resolve gain and ultimate damage. You're going to try to use the sword as little as possible, so there's no point in going for damage here. And since we'll be triggering the ultimate quite a lot, going for ultimate damage is a great choice, since it will allow you to completely wreck some of the softer Onis like archers or Tengu. Next up, we have the single most important part of the entire build, which is the bow. This is by far the best bow for the Hunter, so if you don't have it, I recommend grinding for it by replaying the mission Caravan of Thieves in the story mode. This is an extremely fast and easy mission for the archer. If you get a good teammate, you can plow through it in maybe 15 to 18 minutes, which will net you 1 item every 3 minutes versus 1 every 6, which you get by doing the survival missions. Once you get skipping stone, get helmet piercing ammo for it. A lot of people run headshot refund, which basically means you never run out of arrows, but there are plenty of enemies with helmets which will block the bounces completely unless they land on their face, and that's obviously not very good. In terms of properties, we have draw speed and headshot damage. We are going to be hitting an insane amount of headshots, which is why increased headshot damage is obviously good, but draw speed might throw some people off. Why not get ranged resolve gain or something like that? Well, quite simply, because the longbow takes a while to draw and the amount of damage you do depends on how much you draw the bow. So the increased draw speed is essentially increased DPS, increased kills, and therefore increased resolve gain. Alright, next up we have a ranged charm with increased headshot damage and reload speed. To be honest, I would replace reload speed with even more draw speed, but I'm trying to not burn through all my resources too fast, so yeah. Draw speed would be even more godly on this, so do try and get it. Fire Master is what you want though for another 25% increase to fire damage. This pretty much means every non-Oni enemy that you set on fire is as good as dead. You could also use a Hunter Charm with Foul Arrows to apply Weaken, though I've tried it a couple of times and found it to get bugged and not work as often as you would expect. This will hopefully get fixed because that seems like it would be even better than Fire Master. For the ghost weapons, we have Sticky Bomb with Fired Up, cooldown reduction on kill, and increased status effect duration. This is your additional AoE fire damage, which will decimate clusters of enemies in seconds, and it's basically a replacement for not getting increased cooldown on the explosive arrow. Lastly, Smoke Bomb with both cooldown reductions and munitions. This one is extremely important since munitions will be essential for keeping your stock of arrows. Just make sure you use it often, even if you don't really need it for combat, since once you pop the ult and get a few headshots in, its cooldown will reset extremely fast. Smoke Bomb is also your key to being able to fight on a point without getting wrecked while using the bow. It will create a wall between you and your enemies, which will keep them busy for some time until someone comes help you out. I've seen many builds using Healing Gourd with fast resolve to get one resolve back quickly, but the issue I have with that is that it's only really useful for getting your ultimate back faster if you pop it without any resolve available, which is a very narrow use case. Now, for all of you wondering if maximizing ranged resolve gain is better than the headshot damage that I'm using, the answer is no. Headshot damage inherently translates to more resolve gain because you will get more faster kills with it, so you're essentially getting a 2-for-1. You get damage and you get a lot of resolve. The gameplay style for this build is extremely simple. Get as many headshots as you can. If you're not using it already, turn on the aim assist in the accessibility options to just make everything easier. Keep your distance from enemies as much as you can and aim for the easiest headshots first, which means avoiding any shield users if you can. Use the fire arrows first as much as possible since the damage over time that you do with the fire is going to be insane, and since these will bounce around between enemies, you'll be able to set entire waves of enemies on fire very quickly. Speaking of which, make sure to aim for the head whenever you use the explosive arrow. I picked up the bad habit of shooting the ground with it, which deals way less damage than getting a headshot or a body shot, and those will make the arrow bounce between targets, dealing even more damage and setting everyone that was outside the blast radius on fire as well. If you haven't realized by now, this build is absolutely crazy. You can wipe out an entire wave with a single explosive arrow if you're lucky with the bounces, and the amount of damage that you're dealing gets your ult charged up super fast, allowing you to spam it often for crazy amounts of headshots. All of this insanity gets multiplied when enemies get too close, since you get the additional 50% headshot damage for instant enemy deletion. So try this out and let me know what you think down in the comments section, and share any tweaks that you think might make this even more powerful than it already is. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the other vids I have on Ghost of Tsushima by clicking on the playlist now at the end of the video or down in the video description. And as always, thank you for watching, and I hope I will catch you on the next one.